If you're looking to make super complex shapes in Designspark Mechanical for your 3D printing project, the Blend tool is the tool you're looking for. In this video, I'll show you exactly how to use it. If you are making 3D printed parts and you are free to make any shape imaginable, then the Blend tool can be your new very best friend. The first thing is this tool allows Designspark to generate the surfaces, so the results are not completely controllable or predictable. Sometimes you have to try several approaches by trial and error, but remember, you can always undo it and try it again. But in the end, the Blend tool allows you to make some amazing shapes. So let's get started. The Blend tool is this little icon in the Edit section of the ribbon. So when you click on it, it brings up the Blend tool. And just like many others, it has buttons for features in the workspace and also options over here in the Options section in the column to the left. The tool that is active by default is the Select button, and that allows you to select the faces that you want to blend together. You can select the faces either in the workspace or in the structure tree. And you can add additional surfaces to the selection by pressing the Control and clicking on Additional Surfaces. So you can see once you have more than one surface selected, it creates a grid between the two to show you how it's going to create the new surface between them. If it's not the surface that you want to create, you can hit the Escape key to back out of it. If we reselect these two surfaces in the workspace, and it is the surface that we want to create, then we either hit the check mark to finish the blending or hit the Enter button. That turns the blended surfaces into a solid. Let me undo this one again to show you one more thing, and that would be the options. So again, we're going to select the two surfaces, and if we go over to our options menu, we see some of the options just like we have in the pull tool, the add material, cut material, and no merge. And then we have a lot of options that are listed below it, and only the ones that are bold are available to you. Now this is where that trial and error thing comes into play, because some of these options will affect the way that it blends together and some of them will not. So you just have to trial and error these to see if it changes the way the grid pattern is developed for the blending. As you can see, since this is a straight blend between two faces, none of these options really affect anything at all. But we will walk through these multiple times as we move along. The other thing I want to point out here is that there are a couple grab handles here on the edges of the surfaces. This can change the reference points of how it blends the two faces together. So if I grab one of these and I pull it around here, we can see that now it's going from this point down to that point, and it kind of makes it a curved in surface. If I grab it and pull it even farther, it makes it more extreme. See how that kind of put a twist to the grid pattern that it generated? Then again, hitting Enter or the checkbox will make this into the solid. So now that's made kind of a unique shape right there. But there is a lot more stuff to show you. So let's Control Z to back up and we'll escape out of this. Now, what if we wanted the blend to follow a certain path from one surface to the other? Why, then we would need a guide, so let me show you that. I have created a spline on a different plane here that goes from the edge of one surface to another. So now if I select one face and then the other face, and then use this tool that says Select Guides, this tool is for the edges, to use edges as a guide, and this tool is to use a center line as the guide. Since this spline is on the edges of my two surfaces, I want to use the edge guide, and then I will select the spline to alter the path. Now we can see how that modified the path of the blend from one surface to the other. Before I hit Enter, I can also then go back through my options here to see how it affects the blending. So rotational doesn't do anything. Ruled segments from the pop-up says it creates straight segments between the two blend sections. So if I select that, it basically ignores the edge guide and just makes it back to a straight pull. The local guides does modify how it blends from one surface to the other. As you can see, that one kind of lets it flow a little straighter from one surface to the other on the opposite side of my guide. And sheet metal blend rarely does anything for me. It just goes back to a straight shot. And the normal to center line doesn't do any effect on the edge when I'm using the edge guide. Again, when I hit enter, that will make the solid part, and we can see that that's a pretty interesting shape. Alright, so let's Control Z to get back out of this. Let's escape to get out of the blend. And now let's grab a hold of this spline and let's move it away from the edge and move it into the center of the surfaces. Now that the spline goes from face to face, not edge to edge, I can go back into my blend tool and I can select these two surfaces again, and this time if I try to use it as an edge guide, it will throw up an error saying that the curve does not intersect the blending profile. It's not part of the edge. If I escape out a couple times, let's do this again. We go back into the blend. I select this surface, and this time I'm going to use the Select Center Line option. And if we click on that spline again, it does the same thing for us. It modifies the blend from one surface to the other. But notice this blend is completely different. The biggest modifier when you're going from center line to center line is the normal to center line option. If I turn it off, then that puts us back to a parallel type pull from one surface to the other. And when we turn that one off, some of these others become available. But as you can see, as I go down through these, none of these really affect the pull at all other than the sheet metal bend. So we can finish up this part by hitting the checkbox or the enter. So you can see that makes a completely different shape than the one that we had just before. Now this is blending from a circle to a circle, but what if our shapes aren't the same? Let me turn on a different component here. Here we have two completely dissimilar shapes. We can blend these surfaces as well by using the blend tool and selecting one surface, then Control and selecting the other. We can see here that the blend tool did a pretty good job of blending from one surface to the other here. But remember me saying something about being unpredictable? Let's look closer at the shape the blend tool created here. It did a really nice job of going from this bottom corner here to this bottom corner on the other surface on both sides here. If I escape out of it and I select this surface first and then Control and select this surface, that was in the opposite order of the blend we just did, and now look at the shape. It was the same blend, but now all of a sudden this corner goes down to a reference point here. This corner here comes down to the outside corner of the other surface. So this is what I was talking about when I said that sometimes the results were unpredictable and hard to control. Sometimes Designspark has a hard time figuring out what to do with all of the individual segments of a surface. If that's the case, there's an alternate method of blending one surface to the other, and that is by using its edges. If I escape to get out of this, remember up at the top it says we can use edges or points as well. So we can blend these two surfaces by selecting one edge at a time. So say if I select this edge and then Control and select this edge, it will make a blend between those two edges. And it's back to either selecting the checkbox or hitting enter to set that in as a surface. Now that we've got this started, we can go around one segment at a time and we can select which edges we want to blend together. Now that we're doing one edge at a time, we are in complete control. So I can Control Z and back up out of this, and if we want to, we could select, say, this edge and this edge, and it will blend them. So now we are in control of how it blends one surface to the other. But you are the one that has to make sure that the surfaces you are combining together actually create a solid. Remember, to make a solid, all of the perimeter edges have to be connected. If I escape out of here and select some different edges to combine, I can show you that it's really easy to leave gaps in the outside surfaces that you create. So if I blend this edge and then I blend these two edges, I've left a gap here. But since we are blending edges to edges, I can also select the edge of the surface that we just created and another edge of the surface that we just created, and I can fill in the gaps between those two surfaces to complete my shape. Let me undo these blends and get back to our home view. So far we've just been working with surfaces, but we can blend solids together as well. Let me turn on the solid that we just finished building, and I want to get rid of this surface, so I'm going to detach all of the surfaces, then just select this surface and delete it. So now we're back to just surfaces here. Since we can see the spline, let me go turn off the spline as well. And now we're back to just seeing surfaces. I want to show you the difference in the shape that the blend tool makes when you are working with surfaces compared to solids. That's a mouthful. So here, if I go select the blend tool and I just make a straight blend from one shape to another, it is a straight pull from one surface to the other surface. That is because Designspark has no other guide other than the edges of the two surfaces. If I was to pull these two surfaces into solids real quick, and then blend between those same two surfaces, I would see that I get an entirely different shape. And that is because it's using this surface of the solid as the guide to start the blend from one shape to the other. So keep that in mind. If you're trying to make nice smooth transitions from one shape to another shape, it's better to use solids and let Designspark blend those two shapes together. Again, we can also change the path that blend takes by using our guide tools up here. If I undo what we just did and hit escape, I can go turn that curve back on and we'll redo a new blend. So I'll select this surface and I'll select this surface, and we're going to go use that center guide button again, and we're going to select the spline. Now before we set this shape in, let's look at the UV pattern of what it made for us. So the thing that sticks out the most to me is this funky pattern down here where it's trying to fold over itself. Let's go through our options and see if anything gets rid of that. So the first one is normal to center line, and that one kind of did the trick. So in this case, normal to center line is trying to make each one of the rings of the blend follow the points of the spline as it moves from one surface to the other. So like I was saying before, a lot of times it is just trial and error and working your way through the options until you come up with a shape that you are happy with. Once you're happy with the shape, you can enter to set it in. So now we've been working with flat surfaces, from one flat surface to another here, and from one flat surface to another flat surface here. What if our surfaces are not flat? I have another example I can show you, so let me turn it on and turn these two off. So here I have some surfaces on the face of a cylinder and some flat faces that are off to the side. As long as you can select a surface, you can blend it. And remember, a surface is an enclosed loop of edges. So here we could blend this surface to this surface. And that ends up making a straight blend from the surface on the curved face to the flat surface that we blended it with. We can also do the inner one here by selecting it and then control and selecting the center of that one. And again, it does a straight blend. Now, if Designspark is trying to blend faces to faces, they do need to be similar shaped. So if I selected, say, this face and selected this outer perimeter, it will throw up an error because it doesn't know what to do with all of these edges on the inside of this surface. So if you were trying to blend the perimeter of this inner face to the outer perimeter of this face, we would need to do it by using edges. So let me escape to back out and show you that if we double clicked on this one and then control and double clicked on this one, that would allow us to blend a shape from the inner perimeter of this face to the outer perimeter of that face. See how that worked? And again, if I didn't want this to be a straight blend from one face to the other, I have two methods of making that different. The first is to pull this face into a solid by using the pull tool. If I pull this up even just a little ways and then go back to my blend tool, escape to deselect my face, then I can tell it I want to go from this edge by a double click and then control and click this face, and it will make me a modified blend from one surface to the other. See how that affected the shape of my blend? The other way I can modify the shape of the blend from one surface to another is by using the guides again. So over here I have another curved face and another flat face, and I've got some splines in between the two of them. So let me show you this real quick. If I select this face and then control and select this face, we can see it makes a straight blend from one surface to the other. Now what happens if I use my edge guide tool and I select an edge? This kind of had an unpredictable outcome. It modified all of the surfaces of the blend from one face to the other. Let's try our options to see how that affects it. Rotational has no effect, and normal to center line has no effect. And of course the sheet metal is going to revert it back to a straight pull. So that is what we're stuck with if we only have one guide here. But what happens if I select a second guide? So if I control and click on the second guide, now we can see that it's kind of an hourglass shape, but it's only in that direction. Notice it's still straight going from the ends, but it is curved on both sides in the middle. Once again, before we set this shape, let's go through our options. Rotational blend has no effect. Normal to center line has no effect. Local guides has an effect. Let's see what that did. So that just basically made a dimple right where the guide is, but left the rest of the shape straight. And let's see if clocked guides has any effect. It does have some effect towards the ends, but I think that was just because it turned our local guides off. If we keep our local guides off, no, it does have some small amount. So if this ended up being the shape that we wanted to have, we can click our check mark or hit enter, and that sets that into a solid. So I have one last thing to show you. Sometimes blending from one surface to another becomes very difficult. Let me show you this example. If I wanted to blend this surface to this surface and have it be a semicircle, I have one more guide I can turn on here. So that shows you the path that I want it to take. And if I try and do it as a surface to surface blend, I can select one surface and then the other, and it will not blend now because they are side by side with one another, and it won't blend in this direction. If I tell it I want it to follow this path, it still won't blend, and that is because there's enough difference from the shape of these two surfaces that it doesn't know how to deal with it. And even if I escape out of this and I go back to my select tool and I select this edge and I control and select this edge, it will make the shape pull, but when I tell it I want it to go around a circle, it fails again because it doesn't know how to deal with this segment being curved, going around the arc and hitting a flat segment on the other side. But this blend is still doable. Let me escape out of this, and if we do one segment at a time, I can go select the segment, control select the segment I want it to blend to, then I can tell it to follow this line and it makes that surface. If I set that surface in, I can work my way around and go to the next one. So the next one is going to be one segment at a time. This edge here blended to this edge following this arc, and enter. And I have to be able to select the edges, so we need to rotate around, and I can tell it this edge, control, and select this edge, again following this path, enter. And the last one is to go select this edge. I have to get to where I can select this one. Now I can control select this edge, and one last guide, that one right there, and enter. Now it has made surfaces that go from this solid over to this solid, but it did not combine them. If we look over in the structure tree, we can see that it made 4 individual surfaces. So now we can try to combine these surfaces together. So let's select 2 different surfaces and try to use the combine tool and see if it will put them together. And it did. So let's try it again. This surface and this surface, and this surface and this surface. So now we've got one surface and a solid here. Let me get back to my select tool to get out of the combine, and we need to look a little bit better at what's going on here. This solid and this surface cannot be combined because the surface has no ends on it. So I'm going to see if I can fix this surface and turn it into a solid part, and I'm going to do that by turning off the solids that it's connected to here, so that all I'm looking at is the surfaces of this component. Now that I can see that these edges that don't have a surface in them, if I was to select this edge and tell it to fill, and select this edge and tell it to fill, that turned that into a solid. Now that I've got a solid here and a solid here, if I turn it back on, I should be able to combine these two. So if I tell it to select this one and select this one and use the combine tool, that should glue those together into one solid. And if I come back down and turn on my other solid down here, I should be able to grab this one, drag it into this component, expand it, and then tell it I want to combine these two by doing the selection tool, doing this solid and this solid, and combining those into one. Now that is all one solid all combined. If I go back to my home and escape to click out of it, now we have one solid component there. So sometimes it can be very difficult to get your solids to combine together exactly the way you want them to. But if you keep working at it and keep selecting items, you can get it to where it will combine the components that you want it to have. Give that one more try. I can do my control and click this surface. And we want to blend that. And let's hit enter. Now we've got a component with a couple surfaces. Let's turn this surface off so we're not seeing it. And one last step, perhaps we can combine this solid and this surface and click combine. Now we've got one solid component there. So as you can see, the blend tool can make some amazing shapes. It can be a bit of a trial and error. You just have to keep at it and keep going through the different features and the different options until you see the shape that you really want it to be. And when you're finished, it should be able to make unique shapes and make your designs just a little bit better. There was an awful lot of information to cover on this topic. If I happen to miss something or something was not quite clear enough for you, please leave me a question in the comments below. I hope that you're finding all of this information useful. Now that we're into the more advanced tools, the blend tool can be extremely useful for making very complex shapes. You can see that the shapes we're able to create are just amazing. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And as always, if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so that you're updated with all of my future videos. And once again, thank you for watching.